Today we're going to be talking about the Dayton VA Medical Center. Founded in 1867 as one of the original branches of the National Homes for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers, the site originally served Union Civil War veterans. Today, the Dayton VAMC provides world-class medical care on a National Historic Landmark campus. This webinar will include information on the National VA History Center, which will occupy 2 historic buildings on the VAMC campus. Once complete, the NVAHC will be the central location for seminal artifacts and archives of historic significance from across hundreds of VA locations. Today's presenters are Michael Visconage, the VA Chief Historian, and Alec Bennett, the VA Senior Historic Preservation Specialist. Our webinar today is presented in part by the Ohio Arts Council and is one of the benefits of being a supporter of Heritage Ohio.
But right now you should be seeing a slide that says VA History Initiative. And I'll start my presentation right now. So the start of our story is, it has been over 2 decades ago when VA recognized that they had a deficit in kind of the organizational structure and services to the administration, and it was that they realized they did not have a centralized process for collecting or preserving their own history. And while many incremental steps followed, different things delayed the process, but I'm excited to say that I joined the VA in 2019 as the first VA Chief Historian. And in 2020, we stood up the VA History Office to provide this overarching history initiative to both provide a history program for the VA and to move forward with this commitment to establish a National VA History Center as a place to preserve artifacts and archival materials. And next slide, please. So let's walk back at first. Historically, really, when we look at the VA, while the VA itself as a modern entity is about 92 years old, really its predecessor entities walk all the way back to the founding of this nation. And really, this is historically a very unique relationship that America has with its veterans. And I think to understand that, let's take a look at what were the reference point that our founders had at that time. Well, it was the European reference point. And really, veterans were held in low regard in that European model. A couple of examples: if you were traveling in France in the 1750s, it was not uncommon if you stopped at an inn for the night to see a sign that said, "No dogs, prostitutes, or soldiers allowed." If you were grievously wounded in 16th century Britain, you might be given a begging permit that would at least allow you to beg legally on the streets of London. And if you were killed at the Battle of Waterloo, the ceremony, honoring your ultimate sacrifice, well, it was that pits were dug around the battlefield and all the dead bodies within the vicinity, oh, by the way, and the dead horses were pushed into the pits, covered and left unmarked, unless you were a nobleman or an officer, in which case you might have your body carted home. But all of this speaks to the idea that in the European model at that time, that often soldiers were mercenaries, opportunists, conscripts at best. But just as the American experiment reframed so many things, it reframed the relationship between what a free nation and its citizen soldiers. And that is the genesis of this unique history of the Veterans Administration and its predecessors. So that history, we can look back actually to the Continental Congress in 1776, made the first mention of pensions for specific injuries, lost limbs to Continental soldiers. And really for the first 75 years of our history, the type of relationship with veterans and those benefits were typically compensation like that, a pension for a lost limb, or land grants for service. And early on, these were often administered by the individual states. But it's the Civil War that really creates a new era, as the Civil War is impactful in so many ways. 3% of the Union population was in uniform. It was the first time we had a draft. But in that agrarian society, if you lost a limb, you couldn't easily go back to being a farmer or a blacksmith or the other things that you were able to do before your service. And it caused this idea to look at, hey, what do we need to do for our veterans. And the idea that the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers was a way to do that. It also was a time shortly after the Civil War when the national cemeteries were established. We also see the rise of some of really the early, very influential veteran service organizations, such as the Grand Army of the Republic in the case of Union Civil War veterans. Fast forward a little bit, we go on to the next major war, and the same story of the VA is how do we adapt in particular to these new waves of veterans after a significant conflict? And what does our society want in terms of that special relationship between the nation and our veterans? What do we owe our veterans, if you will? After World War I, we see different types of injuries. We see more survivability because of anesthesia, infection control, the evacuation process. And it's this idea that, oh, hey, we should maybe have some rehabilitation and retraining that should go on. It's also a time when the initial VA and research and development entity begins, looking at what are the best practices, what are the most innovative ways to provide the care that veterans need. But it's also a time when the nation reassesses these different parts that help serve veterans. At this time, there was, Veterans Insurance, there was the Veterans Bureau, there was the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. And ultimately, then it's in 1930 where all of these are pulled together in what we would recognize as the modern VA. But there's also shortfalls at this time in that there is the act that passes that is for a bonus for our World War I veterans, but it's not to be delivered until 1945. And then we see during the Depression, the bonus army veterans come to DC to lobby to have that bonus awarded earlier than planned. And one of the outcomes of that was the president decided that he would clear the veterans from their encampments, and that was not a real happy outcome for that particular case. But it plays forward then to World War II. So in World War II, we now have 16 million in uniform. That's 1/10 of the population at that time. And in some ways, it's that World War I experience and things like the bonus march that that are catalysts for things like the GI Bill, which is a really extensive rethink of this idea of what do we owe veterans. It includes, for the first time, education benefits, the home loan program. The initial GI Bill had small business loans in it. And it was also a time at the end of World War II when there was a total rethink of what is the healthcare approach, the idea of just totally rethinking our Veterans Health Administration hospitals. It's a time when Omar Bradley, when still in uniform, is asked to lead the VA in 1946 through this huge influx of veterans. Again, the other eras of veterans, we see the Korean War, the Vietnam War, changes, modifications to the GI Bill. And believe it or not, in 2023, it is the 50th anniversary of the all-volunteer force. So we have a different type of professional military, and we just have spent the last 20 years in a long war in Iraq and Afghanistan, but all of these things all have implications for what is the unique relationship between Americans and veterans. Next slide, please. So this is a quick why. This is the why is this important? Why, if we're interested in taking great care of veterans or paying attention to veterans, we should be aware that this is the Census Bureau study from 2020. And the takeaway is that I usually share with our leaders is, hey, perhaps when you were growing up, you might have been able to walk down the street, or your school teacher or your coach, they were all veterans. And in our peak in the early 80s, we had over 35% of the population were veterans. But that number right now has dropped to under 10%, and the forecast is for a continued drop. So if we're counting on just our population as a whole to sort of understand and know what a veteran is by personal contact, that is not so much the case anymore. Next slide, please. So when I talk about this process of standing up a VA History Office, so this is our working mission statement. And we are very much a new business startup within a large federal agency. And so what did we not have before this? Well, as the second largest federal agency, without any overarching history program, we really didn't have an orchestrated way or protocols for collecting and preserving our own history, artifacts and archival materials, or using those things to help our leaders in making real-time decisions, referencing what we might have done before. And likewise, no way to help our employees in that same way, to tell new employees how we've done things before in that historical reference point, as well as veterans and the public in general. The key parts to how do we do that, again, we knew there were two Two pieces of this: establish a VA history office, but also to advance the development of a national VA history center. And this was a task that was already on the table. In 2017, the VA signed a memorandum of agreement with key stakeholders in Dayton, the mayor's office, county council, city leaders, that put aside several historic buildings for use as the place where we would situate these artifacts and archival pieces. The next step was to start orchestrating a team, and this was first to make sure that our administrations within VA had effective, qualified historians documenting their work. And to refresh, it's the Veterans Health Administration, the Veterans Benefits Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration are our main administrations. Hooray, the National Cemetery Administration, while it's our smallest, they have long paid close attention to their history. They have 3 historians on their team, so easy to integrate them. Veterans Health Administration had a historian, but that individual had retired and the position had been left open for a year, but teamed with them to fill that. Veterans Benefits Administration did not have any historian, but again, they were anxious to join in and work with them to help hire a great historian for their team. From there, we moved on to hiring a senior archivist and a curator for the Inter-VA History Office team. And then from there, it's the idea, we went out and looked at lots of federal agencies, the military service history programs and museums with the idea, let's look at their best practices as we do this, and let's borrow from them. Also reached out to the Smithsonian Institution, the National Archives and Records Administration, academic community, and other key stakeholders. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So part of that mission in terms of the VA history program side was also the idea of, well, we also preserve contemporary materials that we think will have likely historic value. Well, not long after showing up, and it wasn't on my calendar, probably wasn't on yours either, we were going to have this pandemic. And fortunately, while we had a very, very small footprint, we knew from the get-go that we needed to collect materials pertaining to the VA's response to this national emergency. So I'm happy to say we got our arms around quite a few documents, planning documents, presentations, press releases, after action reports, and then moved on to doing oral history interviews, of which we've done a little over 50, ranging everyone from the secretary to frontline employees in terms specifically asking questions about how do we choose to, what decisions we made in response to the pandemic, some of the innovations that needed to happen, because the VHA is our largest healthcare, the largest healthcare provider in the country, no surprise, and a huge, huge role, as did our other administrations. I think that is just one example of what does the history program do. It's that contemporary collection. So we will have that available to historians once it's fully processed, with the idea that researchers, writers, and scholars will use that far into the future. Next slide, please. Why Dayton? So again, Dayton had already been selected, and what an awesome campus. I don't know how many of you have been to the Dayton campus. I suspect some of you have, which is great. And the illustration you're seeing is a lithograph from the late 1800s. But again, if the part of our story is how did we choose to serve veterans after major conflicts? So this was established in 1867 as one of the first 3 national homes for disabled volunteer soldiers. And the thinking at the time was, well, what do veterans all have in common? Well, they have the military in common. So let's set it up like a military organization. And this 500-acre self-sustaining campus ran like a military unit. The veterans lived in barracks. They wore military-like uniforms. They had formations every morning. And to the degree you were able, you had a job. They did raise their own animals on the campus, raise some of their own crops, etc. But the idea was you had something to do there as well. I think really impressively, the first veterans on the campus, they quarried the stone and built the first buildings on campus, of which several are still there, including the 1871 chapel. And then they took the quarry areas that you see now that are lakes in the lithograph, those were the quarries. And they created these recreational areas that then included decorative gardens. They created an atrium where they could grow exotic plants. They formed a zoo where they had exotic animals. And then they went on to have things like they formed a band. They decided to have parades. This campus became a tourist attraction of note in its day. Shortly after the turn of the century, it had over 600,000 annual visitors. They had to build a hotel off campus to house the visitors and run a rail spur line to the campus at the time because of those visitors who wanted to come and walk the grounds, listen to the concert from the band, and speak with the veterans. It also is an adjacent to it, the National Cemetery, which was established at the same time. In the cemetery, we have veteran interments that date from Revolutionary War service. It has the largest concentration of U.S. colored troops, the official name of African Americans who served for the Union during the Civil War. It has the first female VA employee who was the matron for the Dayton home. So very historic in its own right. But again, a great location. The Dayton community hugely supportive. Lots of collaborators who are ready to work with us. Wright State University is one of the oldest public history programs in the country, as one example, but it's also the home of the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, the National Park Service, Wright Brothers Historic Sites, and just a great city to be in. We also have great support from what is now our National VA History Center Foundation. This was one of the city commitments at the time of the 2017 memorandum of agreement that they would stand up a nonprofit foundation to help raise money for the final build out of the buildings that would be used for an archive and an exhibit space. So excited about their progress, and again, a great community to be in. Next slide, please. These are just two of the buildings. One is the old headquarters, one is the clubhouse building, two of the buildings that we are working to prepare for this purpose. The immediate preparations are being completed in terms of the preparation work by the Veterans Health Administration. But again, our key partners, the nonprofit foundation, will begin a national fundraising campaign probably next year to begin raising the funds to restore these facilities for their final use. And our agreed on audacious goal is we want to open the first piece of a public space, which probably will be an archival space, in 2026. Next slide, please. Already on campus, we're happy to say the campus administration, huge, great supporters, could not ask for anything more. Mark Murdoch is the director of the medical center there. Doug Ledbetter is the director of the National Cemetery, great partners. But in particular, Mr. Murdoch allowed us to have a building that you see there, which is our temporary artifact and archival storage site. So we are already starting to do the first process to assemble the materials that we will want to preserve, but then ultimately the percentage of those that will be displayed. It's also the home of our senior archivist and our curator. Next slide, please. One of the things we knew we wanted to do early on and could do early on, even as a small team getting started, was to start communicating about this really special, what I would call a noble endeavor, to help tell this unique story of this special relationship between America and its veterans. And so standing up a website is something we did over a year ago. Excited to continue to grow that. And what you're seeing there is one of the features we started this year was every other week new stories that just help tell the history of the VA in 100 objects. So incrementally, we've been feeding those out. I think we're about up to item number 45 at about this point. But they're great short vignettes that allow us to start showing some of those archival materials and artifacts that tell this story in advance of a brick and mortar location. So absolutely would encourage everyone to go check that out at your convenience later. There's an opportunity on the homepage too, if you scroll down just a little bit, where you can register for our periodic emails that'll just update you on what's new and interesting. We usually send those out once or twice a month just to keep our interested parties updated, but very excited about that. And next slide, please. So winding down a bit here, just want to highlight one of the artifacts that's in our collection, and I usually show this to our internal groups. And my question is, well, how much is this? This is a beer token from the 1880s, to clarify, and this was used on in particular this one on the Dayton campus. But my question is, how much is this worth? Well, I'd come up on eBay, I don't know, every couple of months for $50 or $100, right? But my message to our employees and leaders is, oh, well, to us, this is priceless, because what it represents is the story of these beer tokens. And what happened was, as I mentioned, these campuses were very popular and successful in their day. Dayton at its peak had 8,000 veterans on its campus. But surprise, surprise, not long after their establishment, oh, guess what would spring out up outside taverns, right? And they were more than happy to feed, to serve veterans, alcohol until they were, sometimes falling down drunk. And in Leavenworth, Kansas, our national home leadership there tried to figure out, okay, well, this causes health problems, it causes behavioral problems on a campus-like setting, right? But we want to honor veterans' right to, have a beer if they want. So, well, you know what? We are going to have a beer hall on campus. And that is what they did, and use the beer tokens to have some type of degree of oversight on, how much you could have, to drink at any one time. And they saw a dramatic decrease in the type of incidents and health implications at that time. We have the records that kind of demonstrate that drop in those sorts of problems during that time period. And the practice that was instituted at Leavenworth was adopted around to most of the other national homes with the same positive results. And my message to our leaders is, the challenges that we have as a modern VA in helping veterans, right? These are not new challenges. Substance abuse can be a problem in parts of the veteran community today, just as it was after the Civil War. Just as problems like readjustment and reemployment, homelessness, suicide, PTSD, these are not new problems. But understanding our history and how we problem solved, not perfectly all the time, right? Lots of challenges along the way, but understanding what we did before, this is an immeasurable value to us as an organization. Next slide. And the final thought is, so this is the Leavenworth beer hall that they established in its day in that 1880s period. That concludes my update to you today. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited to be here and speaking to all of you. And subject to your questions, happy to interact with you.
So if anyone has any questions, you can type them in right now. Michael has another meeting to attend, so you can type in your questions for him now, and then just in a moment, Alec will get started on his portion of the presentation.
And Alex, subject to your timeline, I realize we're over to, I can hang around for a couple of minutes, but I'm happy to just answer them offline later, whatever keeps things on schedule.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions coming in at the moment, so Alec, if you want to switch over to your presentation, we can get started with that. Just to let everyone know, in your handout section is a copy of Alec's presentation, and I am sending it out right now in the chat. There's also a YouTube link to a video that will correspond to his presentation. All right, Michael, we do have a question from Betsy. What is the interaction with the National Archives? You mentioned collecting COVID documents. Wouldn't they all go to NARA?
Great question, Betsy. So we work closely with our records management officers. Each of the administrations I mentioned has a record management officer, as does the overarching VA central office. Work very closely with them. So of course, things that are in the permanent records, schedule will of course go up to National Archives as they are mandated to. But often it's the planning documents that aren't on the permanent document list that we know have great value to historians. I would say that my senior archivist, Robin Rogers, just a great add to the team. She came to us from her position as the chief archivist at NASA. But prior to that, she had 10 years in management experience at NARA and is very familiar with the protocol. So, and is my key person in making sure those arrangements are square and those contacts are square, both directly with our account manager at NARA and with our records management officers.
All righty. I don't see any more questions. Alec, we are ready for you to take over.
Hey, Alec, I'm going to throw out one tidbit, and I'll send it by email because I don't see where I can drop it in chat. But I wanted to highlight the National Cemetery Administration. Just give you an update on their grant opportunities for 2023 that will be posted in late February, early March. If there's anyone on the call that would be interested in exploring some of those grant opportunities, I think they have $2.2 million that they are going to disperse. I know they'd love to do some stuff related to the Dayton National Cemetery, but I can share that later. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks, Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my first slide on the screen?
Yep.
Great. My name is Alec Bennett. I am a Senior Historic Preservation Specialist here in the Office of Construction and Facilities Management within the Department of Veterans Affairs. My office is based in DC. Today I'm going to be giving just a brief summary of historic reuse opportunities that will soon be available on the campus of the Dayton VA Medical Center. As Devin mentioned, you should have a copy of my slides in the chat box. Those should be available to you. Please, grab them and take them for your reference. I've included my email address and my office's website, just in case you like any additional information. I also have a couple of other links in my presentation that you should be able to use that slide deck in case you have further questions. So to set the stage, Mike Visconage, excuse me, really, set the stage for the history of the Dayton VA Medical Center. I'm going to talk, a little bit about the history, but I'm also going to talk more about, future opportunities. So, as all of you, I think, are well aware, the Dayton VA Medical Center is an active veterans hospital that provides a wide range of medical services to the veterans community in the Dayton area and then the wider region. So as Mike mentioned, the Dayton VA Medical Center is one of the oldest properties in the nationwide VA healthcare system. Established in 1867 as a central branch for the National Home of Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. For a number of years, the Dayton VA Medical Center, the Dayton campus, served as the administrative center for the system of National Soldiers' Homes, which had locations across the country. In recognition of the rich history of the campus, in 2012, the Secretary of Interior designated a large portion of the campus as a National Historic Landmark. I'm sure that many of us on the call are kind of familiar with National Historic Landmark designations. Those are historic places of exceptional value to the history of the United States. So in contrast to the National Register of Historic Places, there are 90,000 listings on the National Register of Historic Places, whereas there are only 2,600 National Historic Landmark listings. So it really is places with exceptional value. There are multiple properties on the campus that are over 100 years old. Before the end of this year, VA will be issuing a request for proposal, also known as an RFP, to developers for the reuse of underutilized historic buildings on the campus. So really, the goal of my presentation, the kind of key of my presentation, is to really spread awareness of this forthcoming RFP. For more information about this RFP, I've embedded a YouTube link in this slide. I'm not going to play it on this presentation, but this is the same YouTube link that I have included in the chat box. Once the presentation is done, certainly encourage everyone to view this YouTube video, which has more information about the properties that will be available and the overall EUL program on campus. I'm going to touch a little bit on what an EUL is later on in my presentation, but I really do encourage everyone on the call to view this YouTube video. So there are a series of underutilized historic properties on the VA Medical Center campus. VA will consider any end use that will complement the existing services for veterans on the medical center campus. On this slide, I've included a list of buildings that are going to be included in this RFP. All of these buildings are either contributing to the National Historic Landmark listing or contributing to the National Register of Historic Places listing, which is a little bit of a larger area on the campus. So again, just to kind of set the stage and provide a little bit of additional background, the Dayton VA Medical Center is located approximately 4 miles west of downtown Dayton. This slide isn't intended just to provide kind of a layout of the campus, kind of the overall campus map. For awareness, many of the medical services are kind of provided on the western half of the campus. Building 330 is the main hospital building. The National Historic Landmark District and many of the historic buildings available for reuse are going to be on the right side of this map. They're going to be more on the eastern side of the campus. That's more of the historic side. The north side of the campus, the upper part of this map includes the National Cemetery. So I mentioned EUL or Enhanced Use Lease earlier on in the presentation. This slide is intended really just to give kind of, a broad kind of wave top background on the legal authorities under which VA can lease out historic properties. So VA does have a Enhanced Use Lease Authority, an EUL authority. It is specific to the department and it is specific to VA, and it authorizes VA to enter into leases with other organizations on a long-term basis. There are multiple EULs currently on the Dayton VA Medical Center campus. For more information about those EULs, I encourage you to look at the YouTube link. So the second authority that we have is based in the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 111. Section 111 authorizes all federal agencies, so not just VA, but all federal agencies, to lease out historic properties. So for those of you that may have visited Washington, D.C., the NHPA Section 111 is what authorized the General Services Administration to lease out the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue for use as a hotel. So, when we talk about EUL, we mean Enhanced Use Lease and that authority. When we talk about Section 111, we're really talking about the authority under the National Historic Preservation Act. So we have a number of contacted people for the Historic Reuse Initiative. Please feel free to email me directly if you like. my email address is at the top of this presentation. I've also included the email addresses for a couple of my colleagues, Jessica Holderman, who is the Dayton VA Medical Center planner, DeCarol Smith, who is, works here in the DC office, and she is part of the office that administers the enhanced use lease program. And if you have any, additional information about the Section 111 program, you can email my colleague Shahidat Abbas at the email address on this slide. I believe that my colleagues Jessica Holderman and DeCarol Smith are on the line. So when we get to questions, if there are questions that might be specific to them, I think they are on the line at the moment and may be able to answer. So, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we are really now just in the stage where we're just trying to cast as wide a net as possible. So, the point of this presentation, the intent of this presentation is really just to, reach out to that, audience, the Heritage Ohio audience. Please, if you are interested in, learning more about these opportunities, if you're interested in being notified when the RFP goes out, please email me or please email my colleagues here on the slide. Really what we're trying to do is just, like I said, spread information, spread awareness, and so that when the RFP does go out, we can, connect to as many people as possible, that may have interest in reusing some of these underutilized historic properties. So with that, I'm free to answer any questions that you may have on this initiative or on my presentation.
Thank you,
Beautiful,
Alec.
Alec. Thank you so much for that. So Devin will facilitate questions if you type them into the chat box, and he will go through those.
And just to kind of give a few mentions about some upcoming events as people type their questions in. Coming up on December 14th, our next webinar is going to be on Vibrant Communities with Jobs Ohio. It's going to discuss their Vibrant Communities program, which launched last year. And the second round of those is imminently going to be accepting applications soon, so they'll get some information out for all of you. And also in January, we'll be discussing the Ohio Arts Council grants for the upcoming couple years, so that'll be an interesting one for everyone to attend. First question that we have in here, Alec, is when do you expect the RFP to be released for the public to start submitting?
So thank you for that question. We expect the RFP to be released before the end of the calendar year. I was hoping that my colleagues would be able to participate, but I'm not sure if they are. So I did talk with them prior to the to my presentation, and yeah, we are looking at issuing an RFP before the end of this calendar year.
If you want me to unmute Jessica, I can. I'll do that right now. And if she wants to contribute anything, she can.
Hi, this is Jessica. I am not aware of a specific date at this point either. And I think DeCarol is on. I don't know if she is able to elaborate or if it's just, at this point, my understanding is at least by the end of the calendar year.
And I just unmuted DeCarol as well.
Yes. Hello. Good day, everyone. Yes, I'm DeCarol Smith from the Office of Asset Enterprise Management. I'm the portfolio manager responsible for the EUO program for the Dayton VA Medical Center initiative here. And yes, Alec is correct. By the end of the calendar year, we would like to have the RFP out for taking proposals for redevelopment and reuse of the property at the campus.
Thank you all. The next question I have is, Is this going to be the first VA hospital kind of doing this? Did any of the other VA hospitals have a similar situation where they've executed one of these RFPs and had successful programs put in place?
So thank you for that question. So I will kind of take a first stab at it, and then I'll ask DeCarol to jump in. So VA has EUL leases in place at a number of VA medical centers. There are, I believe, 4 active enhanced use lease and on the Dayton VA Medical Center campus currently, and then we have a number of leases, nationwide at different medical centers. The EUL program, works with developers to build new construction or to, essentially rehabilitate historic VA buildings, using the historic rehabilitation tax credit and the low-income housing tax credit to create housing for homeless veterans. DeCarol, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, Alec, you said it in a nutshell. There's other VA campuses. Currently, we have over 100 EULs executed around the country on VA property, and a number of financing sources, as Alec spoke of. Low-income housing tax credit, historic tax credits have been used, along with private funding from lenders and state funding to have these developments get completed for veterans.
Thank you. Our next question is from Angela. Is there any part of the archive at the VA in Dayton open to the public at this time?
Devin, do you know, is Mike Visconage still on, or has he dropped off?
He's self-muted. He might still be there, or he might have just dropped off one part of himself when we had 2 of him on, so maybe not.
So I don't think that any of the archival space is open to the public yet. I would defer to Mike for any additional information, but my sense is that no, it is not yet open to the public.
And Angela, I'll pass your message on to Mike and he can respond to you. All right. Any final questions from anyone? This is the time to type them in. All right. Not seeing any more. Matt, do you have any final words for the audience today?
Thank you all for joining us today. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel. We're very grateful to Michael and Alec for sharing the story of the VA hospital and hope they're successful in finding a developer to save these very important buildings in the great state of Ohio. With that, everyone, have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you next on December 14th with our webinar from Jobs Ohio about the Vibrant Community Program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.